Books versus experience in Vedic astrology. Why intuition and insight matter more than memorization. In the study of Vedic astrology, classical texts offer a vast reservoir of wisdom, but they are never the final word. Books serve as maps, not the territory. They provide foundational language, archetypes, and predictive structures, yet they often contradict each other or leave gaps that only lived experience can fill. One text may glorify a combination as a Raja Yoga, while another warns of the same setup leading to downfall. The truth is, no book can account for the infinite variability of human charts and karmic paths. This is where experience becomes more valuable than memorization. Many yogas listed in texts are designed as teaching tools, ideal types rather than universal truths. These combinations are often presented without conditions like planetary strength, house ownership, or timing. For instance, you may read that Venus in the fifth house gives artistic talent and happiness from children. But if Venus rules the 6th and 11th for a Cancer ascendant and is debilitated in Virgo, the actual manifestation could be strained relationships, legal complications involving offspring, or artistic frustration rather than talent. Without experiential insight, such nuances are easily overlooked. Over time, a seasoned astrologer begins to see patterns that are not in books. A seemingly minor combination, when repeated in enough charts, reveals its own logic. A debilitated moon in Scorpio may not always cause emotional volatility. It may, in certain contexts, grant psychological depth or occult insight. These are not textbook outcomes, but realities observed through repeated case study. This accumulation of insight builds a living database in the astrologer's mind, one that no classical text can replace. Furthermore, intuition plays a central role in real chart reading. A graha may appear afflicted on paper, yet in the life of the native, it becomes a transformative force. For example, a Ketu in the 10th may signify professional instability, but if the native is on a spiritual path or engaged in metaphysical work, Ketu becomes the very key to their life's dharma. Such subtleties can never be gleaned from books alone. They require sensitivity, psychological observation, and intuitive alignment with the chart's deeper rhythm. Books also fail to account for non-astrological variables. The native's upbringing, free will, cultural environment, or psychological resilience. Two individuals with the same yoga for wealth may live in vastly different economic systems. One may rise due to opportunity, the other may struggle due to social constraints. This is why even accurate yogas often produce varied life outcomes. Astrology reveals potential, not certainty, and experience teaches you how to adjust interpretations to match karmic probability. Another limitation of text-based learning is its rigidity. It can trap the student into binary thinking, good yoga versus bad yoga, benefics, malefic, without appreciating the gray zones. But life is nonlinear. Sometimes a harsh Saturn period leads to maturity and success through adversity. Sometimes a Venus Mahadasha brings disappointment despite being exalted. The truth of a chart unfolds through layers, and the astrologer must listen with more than just the mind. Ultimately, great astrologers develop what can only be called drishti, a form of inner seeing. This is the ability to hold multiple planetary outcomes in mind and sense which one will unfold for this specific native in this specific lifetime. That kind of sight isn't granted by a shloka or table. It comes from years of watching charts, listening to people's lives, and trusting your synthesis over strict rules. In the long run, books build your framework, but experience builds your vision. This is why the wisest astrologers treat texts with reverence, but not as dogma. They test what works, discard what doesn't, and refine their approach with every consultation. Over time, they stop quoting yogas and start translating karma. They don't just read charts, they interpret the soul's unfolding journey. That transformation, from reader to interpreter, from technician to guide, only begins when experience eclipses the written word. Karmic expression through bhavas in Vedic astrology. Each bhava or house in a horoscope is more than a static domain. It is an active stage where karma plays out through your intentions, actions, and consequences. In Jyotish, the bhavas represent the framework within which planetary energies express themselves, often reflecting deeper psychological and karmic narratives. The 2nd, 5th, and 10th houses in particular are intimately tied to mind, thoughts, speech, communication, and action, karma in the world, making them core zones of karmic output. When these houses are influenced by malefics, the expression of karma can become distorted, exaggerated, or obstructed, depending on the graha involved. The second bhava governs speech, food, wealth, family values, and how we express ourselves in everyday dialogue. It reflects both verbal skills and ethical frameworks. When malefics such as Rahu, Saturn, or Mars afflict the second house, speech becomes a karmic trap. The person may suffer from foul language, deception, verbal aggression, or financial instability. Rahu, for instance, inflates whatever it touches. When placed in the second, it often results in manipulative or dishonest speech patterns, sometimes driven by a subconscious desire for validation or power through communication. The fifth bhava holds the seat of buddhi, intellect, creative intelligence, and speculative judgment, as well as being the house of children, romance, and past life merit, purva punya. A malefic influence here doesn't just affect one's thinking. It can cloud judgment, bring impulsivity in decision-making, and distort the ability to perceive long-term consequences. Saturn can bring fear-based hesitation, Mars can lead to rash or aggressive thinking, and Ketu may disconnect a person from coherent logical flow. In extreme cases, fifth house afflictions can manifest as difficulty in childbirth, strained relationships with children, or erratic romantic behavior. The 10th bhava is the domain of karma in its most externalized form, your professional life, societal contributions, and how your actions are perceived publicly. Malefic influence here, particularly by Saturn or Rahu, can bring delays, false starts, humiliation, or reputation issues. A person with Mars in the 10th may be excessively driven, aggressive in career pursuits, or engage in combative workplace dynamics. Rahu in the 10th can create an obsessive desire for fame, status, or visibility, which if left unchecked may lead to unethical practices or burnout due to an insatiable hunger for recognition. These bhavas together create what can be seen as the triad of karmic expression: how we think, how we speak, and how we act. When afflicted, they become the very zones where karmic entanglement intensifies, trapping the native in cycles of miscommunication, poor decisions, or ill-reputed actions. The malefic energies don't necessarily mean failure, but they indicate lessons through friction. For example, a person with Saturn in the 5th may develop wisdom only after repeated failures in love or speculative ventures, building discipline where there was once emotional reactivity. It's important to assess whether these malefics are functionally benefic or malefic for the given lagna. For a Capricorn ascendant, Mars, even as a natural malefic, rules the 4th and 11th and becomes a yoga karaka, softening its impact. But for Cancer ascendant, Mars rules the 5th and 10th, two powerful houses, but can still bring volatility if poorly placed. Context is everything. A Rahu placed in the 2nd, but in a friendly sign and aspected by Jupiter, can transform into powerful speech for public influence, such as a lawyer, speaker, or media professional. When analyzing these houses, one must also consider the nakshatra the malefic occupies, the dasha bhukti timing, and the influence of benefic drishti aspects. A malefic planet's power to harm is significantly reduced if under the protective gaze of Jupiter or placed in exaltation. For instance, Saturn in the 10th house in Libra, its exaltation sign, often results in tireless dedication and a respectable career, despite its natural malefic nature. Ultimately, these three houses teach us that karma is not abstract, it is lived, spoken, and performed. Malefic afflictions are not curses, but invitations for course correction. Through mindful awareness of the bhavas they affect, one can transform inner conflict into conscious action. Understanding this triad allows the astrologer to guide the client toward higher awareness of how thought, speech, and action reflect the soul's karmic blueprint. Simple versus complex graha yogas in Vedic astrology. Many students of Jyotish begin their journey by memorizing the standard graha yogas, planetary combinations that yield specific results. These are often listed in classical texts as direct cause-effect statements. For example, if Saturn is in Aries, the native will be a deceitful fool. Or, if Saturn is in Libra, the person will be wealthy and famous. These types of interpretations fall under what we might call simple yogas, rules derived from isolated planetary placements based on sign or house without considering the broader context. Simple yogas typically rely on only a few parameters: the Rashi, zodiac sign, a planet occupies, the bhava, house it is placed in, and the planet's natural characteristics. While these yogas are easy to memorize and often serve as an introductory tool, they fail to account for the multiple layers of interaction present in a living horoscope. They ignore essential modifiers such as conjunctions, planetary aspects, drishti, strength in divisional charts, dignity, ucha or nicha, and retrograde or combust status. For example, take the claim that Saturn in Libra makes one famous and wealthy. Yes, Saturn is exalted in Libra, which increases its capacity to deliver tangible results. But what if Saturn is also combust by the Sun, or hemmed between malefics, or afflicted by Rahu, or placed in the 8th house? In such a case, the promised fame may never manifest. On the other hand, even a debilitated Saturn in Aries could yield powerful outcomes if it forms a Nichabanga Raja Yoga or is aspected by a strong Jupiter. This is where complex yogas come in. A complex graha yoga considers not just where a planet sits, but what it rules, how it interacts, whom it is associated with, and under what timing conditions it activates. These yogas require synthesis across multiple layers: Rashi, Bhava, aspects, dasha bhukti timing, functional benefic malefic nature based on ascendant, and planetary strength across Shadbala and divisional charts. It becomes more about the story the chart is telling than the mechanical application of a rule. Even the same graha in the same sign can yield different results depending on the ascendant. Saturn in Aries for a Pisces Lagna rules the 11th and 12th houses, two challenging domains, but it sits in the second, the house of wealth and speech. If well aspected, it may make the person a harsh but intelligent communicator with a disciplined relationship to finance. For a Cancer Lagna, the same Saturn rules the 7th and 8th. Its placement in Aries can disrupt relationships or longevity unless modified. This nuance is completely missed in simple yoga readings. Classical texts themselves hint at this. While they present certain yogas in absolute terms, these statements were meant as guidelines, not guarantees. The seers knew that astrology is a probabilistic art, not an exact science. The simple yogas act like archetypes, models of planetary behavior in idealized conditions. Real life rarely offers such clarity. That's why complex yogas, which mirror real-world contradictions, offer more accurate and contextual interpretations. In practice, relying solely on simple yogas leads to rigid interpretations that fall apart in actual client consultations. A chart may contain wealth yogas, yet the native struggles financially. Or there may be divorce yogas, but the person enjoys a long-lasting partnership. These apparent contradictions dissolve once we apply deeper, complex analysis that includes current dashas, transits, nakshatras, and yoga karaka behavior. Context is everything. Therefore, the transition from simple to complex yoga analysis marks the evolution from a student of astrology to a practitioner. It's where Jyotish becomes a fluid, interpretive science rather than a list of outcomes. Learning to recognize how planetary energies combine and mutate through different environments and timings is the hallmark of a skilled astrologer. In this way, complex graha yogas open up a multidimensional view of karma beyond formulaic predictions. Synthesizing ancient wisdom for modern astrology, context over memorization. A recurring truth across all advanced Jyotish practice is this: contextual synthesis matters more than rote memorization. Classical yogas, however elegantly worded, are not divine algorithms. They're symbolic markers pointing to deeper karmic processes. The responsibility of the modern astrologer is to go beyond literal interpretation and activate a broader lens, one that bridges psychology, karma, and lived experience. Only then does ancient wisdom come alive in the contemporary seeker's chart. Many classical yogas were composed in a different social, cultural, and metaphysical context. Statements about wealth, progeny, or royal status were often tied to ancient systems of caste, dharma, and political power. Simply applying those yogas to modern charts without adaptation results in shallow or inaccurate readings. For instance, a king yoga in today's chart might indicate a CEO, thought leader, or tech entrepreneur, not literal royalty. Interpreting yogas without cultural translation creates more confusion than clarity. Moreover, psychological implications must now be factored into every reading. A fifth house afflicted by Saturn or Ketu might not only indicate childlessness or delayed creativity, but also reflect inner doubts, rigid thinking patterns, or suppressed joy. Astrology in the modern age demands attention to emotional patterns, trauma cycles, and mindset conditioning, areas rarely addressed directly in classical texts, but deeply relevant for today's clients. In this way, the chart becomes a tool for inner work, not just outer prediction. The wise Jyotishi must also decode spiritual karma, the subtle thread of dharma, past life residue, and soul contracts. Some yogas activate spiritual awakening rather than material outcomes. A heavily afflicted 10th house may not signify failure, but detachment from worldly ambition, indicating a path of service, monasticism, or inner mastery. Without understanding these higher interpretations, many charts would seem unlucky when, in fact, they are spiritually exalted. Contextual astrology also means analyzing real-world outcomes, what actually unfolds in a person's lived experience. A debilitated planet doesn't always block results. Sometimes it creates humility, resilience, or ingenuity. An exalted planet may not bring blessings unless supported by the right timing and environment. This gap between textbook yogas and life outcomes is where interpretation rather than memorization becomes critical. Contradictions in classical texts, such as the same yoga being praised in one shloka and condemned in another, are not errors, but reflections of deeper truths that can't be grasped at face value. These contradictions act as prompts for the astrologer to think, feel, and sense the chart. They push us toward layered understanding and the development of astrological intuition, what the ancients called drishti or inner sight. Teacher-guided learning plays an essential role in this process. Only a guru, mentor, or experienced astrologer can demonstrate how to weave together these conflicting threads into meaningful insight. With proper guidance, even seemingly unrealistic combinations, like Venus in the 6th house producing marriage bliss, can be decoded, understood, and even validated through real-life patterns. What appears impossible on paper often reveals an underlying karmic compensation or spiritual redirection. Ultimately, the power of Vedic astrology lies not in its rules, but in its capacity to reveal multi-layered truths. Yogas are not destinies, they are karmic hints. And when synthesized skillfully, they illuminate not just what a person will do, but who they are becoming. It's through this evolved understanding that astrology transforms from deterministic fate mapping into a living system of self-awareness and soul guidance. Understanding Bhava interpretation in Vedic astrology. In Vedic astrology, interpreting a chart is not merely about identifying where a planet is placed and repeating classical meanings. The deeper layer lies in understanding bhavas, the 12 houses, as dynamic arenas of karmic unfolding. Every house signifies a domain of life, and every planet interacting with it carries a specific vibration, either amplifying, obstructing, transforming, or refining the native's experiences. The importance of bhava interpretation becomes especially critical when evaluating graha yogas, or planetary combinations, which derive their full meaning only when placed in real contexts of life, not in isolation. Classical texts offer thousands of planetary combinations. Simple yogas like, if Saturn is in Aries, the person will be foolish, or if Venus is in the 10th house, one becomes famous. But these statements, while appearing direct, are actually encoded and symbolic. A planet's mere house or sign position cannot define a person unless we understand what bhava it rules, whether it is a friend or enemy to the ascendant lord, and whether it is strong or weak in that position. Simple readings, when taken literally, can mislead the astrologer and the native. What needs to be examined is why a certain yoga would result in wealth or downfall, which only bhava-based synthesis can explain. The complexity increases when you factor in karaka and bhava lords. Take the 10th house, for instance, representing karma, public status, and profession. A planet like Mars in the 10th can signify engineering, the military, or sports. But what if Mars is also the 7th lord for a Taurus ascendant and combust in a fiery sign? The results vary dramatically. The bhava it owns, the house it occupies, and the planetary company it keeps all influence the final result. Therefore, Astrologers must move from rigid formula to dynamic mapping of how each graha animates life experiences through the bhavas. The placement of malefics or benefics in certain bhavas can alter the entire outcome of a graha yoga. 3 or more malefics in the same bhava or aspecting a key house like the 1st, 2nd, 5th, or 10th, for example, typically obstruct that area of life unless mitigated. This is why Varahamihira and other seers sometimes outlined outcomes for planetary placements that don't even occur astronomically, because they were describing principled outcomes, not physical positions. This is where intuitive understanding begins, knowing that the texts are metaphorical blueprints and not mechanical blueprints. In real-life practice, many horoscopes will contain yogas that appear contradictory. A chart might contain both Raja Yogas, signifying success, and Arishtas, indicating suffering. Which will prevail? That is where Bhava strength, Dasha Bhukti sequence, transits, and Ashtaka scoring play a decisive role. The astrologer must ask, what is the functional nature of each planet for this lagna? Is it in a house where it can express its potential or one that frustrates it? Bhava interpretation is ultimately the lens through which the raw energy of a graha is channeled into karmic experience. The moon in the 6th house for one person may cause emotional turbulence and conflict with coworkers, but for another, it could lead to spiritual transformation through service and healing professions. Why this difference? Because Bhava interpretation must be filtered through nakshatra placement, planetary dignity, and especially the relationships to other bhavas and their lords. Without this interconnected web of analysis, graha yogas become flat statements with little predictive value. Additionally, advanced texts such as Phaladipika and Saravali describe composite yogas, those which only produce results when certain bhava lords combine or influence each other. For example, if the 4th lord and moon both occupy the 6th, 8th, or 12th house and are aspected by malefics, the mother may suffer. But if these same planets are in trick houses but aspected by benefics, they can produce strength of character, renunciation, or service orientation. This shows how context transforms meaning. Grahas are not inherently good or bad. Their bhava context defines their agenda. Finally, while books give starting points, no scriptural rule can substitute for applied experience and pattern recognition. Just as in Ayurveda, where treatment is customized per constitution and doshic balance, Jyotish too must adapt its interpretation to the individual chart. Bhava interpretation is not about listing combinations, but decoding planetary intent. When you interpret a chart through Bhava-centric analysis, you shift from prediction to precision and from superstition to wisdom-based guidance. Why more than 3 malefics in one house indicates intense karmic struggle. In the architecture of a birth chart, each house, bhava, represents a unique domain of karmic expression, from identity and speech to relationships and reputation. When analyzing planetary impact, it's not enough to simply know which graha sits where. What truly matters is the number, nature, and quality of planetary influences acting upon a house. And when a single house is occupied or aspected by 3 or more malefic planets, it often becomes a karmic hotspot, an area marked by struggle, delay, or deep psychological imprint. Malefics in Vedic astrology, namely Mars, Saturn, Rahu, Ketu, and to some extent a waning moon or sun, do not function like bad guys. Instead, they operate as challengers of growth. Wherever they sit, they obstruct, discipline, or magnify karma. When one malefic influences a house, it can indicate a theme of difficulty that can be navigated. But when 3 or more malefics converge on a single house, the pressure intensifies, creating an environment of persistent trial, fear, or overcompensation. Take the 1st house, Lagna, which governs your physical body, self-perception, and life direction. If Mars, Saturn, and Rahu are all placed in the ascendant, the native may experience repeated health issues, low self-esteem, aggression, or identity confusion. Mars inflames, Saturn suppresses, and Rahu distorts. Together, they can create an inner tug-of-war that manifests outwardly as impatience, fear of rejection, or erratic behavior. The native may project strength but battle deep insecurities, a classic case of karmic compensation. The 2nd house, associated with speech, early family conditioning, and financial stability, is another sensitive zone. 3 or more malefics here often indicate speech disorders, harsh or deceptive communication, or unstable income. A person may oscillate between wealth and loss, or struggle to find a stable moral code around values. Rahu in the second exaggerates ambition or cunning in speech. Mars may bring sharpness or verbal aggression. Saturn induces silence or pessimism. The cumulative effect is a karmic pattern tied to how one uses language, resources, and relationships with immediate family. In the seventh house, which governs partnerships, marriage, and public life, the presence of multiple malefics is especially complex. While one malefic may bring delay or realism in relationships, three or more often lead to strained partnerships, repeated separations, or unconventional unions. The native may attract controlling, unavailable, or toxic partners, or embody those traits themselves. Additionally, public reputation may fluctuate wildly, as the seventh house also governs how the world sees you in close engagement. Relationships become a karmic testing ground, often forcing the native into intense self-reflection. However, these malefic clusters don't function in isolation. Their results are moderated by aspects, conjunctions, and planetary strength. If Jupiter aspects the afflicted house, it can soften the blow, introducing wisdom, support, or spiritual resilience. If Venus conjoins a harsh Mars-Saturn duo in the first house, charm and diplomacy may mitigate abrasiveness. This is why multifactorial analysis is essential. No house is doomed simply by the presence of malefics. What matters is how well their energy is balanced, redirected, or supported. Timing also plays a key role. A malefic-heavy house may remain dormant until its related dasha planetary period is activated. At that point, the themes promised by the planetary pressure often come alive with full force. It is during these times that karmic lessons are either repeated or resolved. The astrologer's job is to prepare the native, not with fear, but with awareness and tools for transcendence. Even among charts of highly successful individuals, these combinations are present, but in transformed or redirected form. Some people channel their first house malefic overload into sports, military, or law enforcement careers. Others turn a volatile second house into political charisma or financial fearlessness. The key difference lies in whether the native consciously works with their karma or unconsciously reacts to it. Therefore, when you see three or more malefics in a house, don't treat it as a verdict, treat it as a signal of intense karmic activation in that domain of life. These are the areas that define the soul's evolutionary path. They demand attention, courage, and often a radical redefinition of how the native expresses energy, intention, and desire. In this way, multifactorial influence becomes not a curse, but a crucible, one that purifies and refines the deeper essence of the self. Why Vedic astrology rules must be interpreted, not memorized. Lessons from Varahamihira. In the classical texts of Jyotish, not every planetary rule is meant to be taken literally or mechanically. One of the most illustrative examples comes from the writings of Varahamihira, one of the most revered sages of ancient Indian astrology. In his influential work, Brihat Jataka, he speaks of the results of Mercury being in the 4th, 7th, or 10th house from the Sun, a scenario that is astronomically impossible. Mercury never strays more than 28 degrees from the Sun, meaning it cannot physically occupy those positions relative to the Sun in any real chart. Yet the statement exists. Why? This paradox reveals an important dimension of how ancient seers encoded knowledge. These sages weren't just observers of the sky. They were also philosophers of symbolism and karmic pattern. When Varahamihira placed Mercury in houses it could never physically occupy, he wasn't mistaken. Instead, he was offering a theoretical framework, a way of describing if Mercury could occupy such a place, what would the archetypal outcome be? It's a teaching tool, not a scientific slip. Much of Vedic astrology functions this way, using hypothetical constructs to help the student grasp the full spectrum of planetary potential. These teachings highlight a critical interpretive principle. Jyotish is not a literal science. It is a blend of mathematics, mythology, psychology, and symbolism. Attempting to memorize rules or recite combinations without understanding their spiritual or metaphysical foundation will only lead to superficial or even incorrect predictions. The purpose of a planetary combination is not merely to tell what will happen, but to reveal the why and how behind karmic expression. Ancient authors expected the reader to be initiated, to be guided by a guru or a teacher who could unpack these deeper meanings. This is also why two charts with seemingly identical placements may yield completely different life outcomes. The context, dashas, ashtakavarga scores, transits, strength of dispositors, and the living karmic patterns of the native determines which rule applies and when. The texts give models, not mandates. They outline probabilities, not certainties. Memorizing shlokas and yoga combinations may provide a vocabulary, but interpretation is a language that only comes alive with experience, insight, and intuition. The necessity of commentary in Vedic astrology is akin to that in Vedanta or yoga philosophy. Just as the Upanishads need the bhashya of Shankara to be understood, the Jyotish classics demand that a teacher's living commentary, or an astrologer's experiential synthesis, be brought in to illuminate the meaning. Without this, rules remain hollow or even misleading. A good astrologer becomes an interpreter of signs, not just a repeater of lines. For the modern student of astrology, this is both liberating and challenging. It frees you from the rigidity of rote learning, but demands intellectual flexibility and spiritual maturity. The art of astrology begins where mechanical astrology ends. What looks like a contradiction in the texts is often a deliberate prompt to move you beyond binary logic, to enter the world of layered, symbolic wisdom. So when you read a classical verse that makes little astronomical sense or contradicts another rule from the same author, pause. Instead of discarding it as error or blindly applying it, ask, what is the symbolic value of this statement? What might it represent about the nature of that planet in a certain karmic context? Through that lens, Varahamihira's paradoxical Mercury becomes a profound teaching about imagination, potential, and the metaphysical structure of the cosmos. In the end, Jyotish is not just a science of stars, it's a science of meaning. And meaning is never literal. It's layered, contextual, and always in relationship to the observer. That's why every generation of astrologers must reinterpret the texts, not rewrite them, but re-see them. Because without active interpretation, astrology becomes dogma. With it, it becomes a living mirror of karma,